What's up everyone, Canadian Guy A here. Just a quick note before we get started on the video. This was originally streamed on Twitch, but I found the format was not great and you had to scrub through like 10 hours of footage to find this awesome conference by the awesome animators over at Toys for Bob. So I re-edited the whole conference, made it louder, and made the images that are shown off larger as well to enhance your viewing experience. The original stream is in the description below if you want to check that out too. Anyway, on to the video.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. Thanks to Twitch for having us. My name's Dave Huddleston. I'm the lead gameplay animator on Spyro Reignited.
And I'm Andy Salvo. I'm the lead cinematic animator on Spyro Reignited.
Oh. We're going to talk about some of the process that we went through, some of the issues we had when reanimating Classic. So we're going to start off with gameplay animation. Initially, when we got Spyro, we had a ton of fans. I still have a ton of fans at the studio. Played the originals, and they were just super pumped about doing it. So for animation, though, we didn't have any rigs or models to work off of. So basically, I had my team play through all the games, all three games. We just picked a game, went through it, and started cataloging. And this is basically a team wiki that we have set up at our studio, to where we were able to just go up to every single character in the game, because this wasn't really logged down in on the internet or anything. But we would just go up to each character and basically find out exactly what animations it was doing. Go up to a character in game, take a picture of it. Didn't have the names for it, so it was just like, well, this is an Eskimo guy with a spear. We log that down. It looks like he has an idol. Looks like he has a jump, maybe. And then we'd get everything that we'd do, pop it on this team wiki, and ended up with like 400 plus characters or so. After that, I had to end up sitting through like 3 days worth of meetings trying to figure out exactly how long each animation would take. So with one character, I'd guesstimate at like, a day and a half for an animator, 2 days for another character.
We didn't have any access to the original code or models from the game. We were able to extract some of the mesh for the levels, but the characters themselves were not as easy to get to, and the timings for all the animations didn't exist. So Dave and Dave's team had to kind of just recreate all that stuff from scratch to keep everything feeling original.
Yeah, and many times, especially with Spyro, we actually added GIFs of the exact timing that we could get for Spyro, so we would actually retain the same timing, the same effects. And I mean, Spyro originally just had so much to work off of personality-wise, so it was fairly easy on that aspect. From there, we moved to the concept phase, and I say this, or put this in the presentation, just because in this project, it was always something that animation has always wanted to rectify or just like push more towards. The animation be a part of the entire process, every single process, whether it's concept, whether it's modeling, rigging, even design, that we're in those meetings and being a part of it. And I mean, thanks to our awesome art director, Josh Nadelberg, he was able to actually implement a lot of that. And so we were in the concept meetings, and we were trying to figure out exactly the different parts of animation. Right here you see a face sheet of Spyro of like the extreme positions that we wanted to get him, extreme facial positions that we wanted to be able to achieve on the rig. So it all started like right there and allowed us to actually visualize where we wanted to go and how far we wanted to extend the character. It also allowed us to try to figure out some minor stuff like the toes. There was quite a while in the concept that he had like some weird baby monkey feet.
If Very tiny toes, very pointed.
Tiny toes, and it's just it went even to modeling, went all the way to rigging. We started doing tests with it, and it just started looking weird. And so, I mean, we took
hard
maybe
to get a
2
good
to 3
shape.
days
Yeah.
just figuring out different types of toes. And Josh would just throw it up on the on our little chat, and he would be like, "All right, here's 10 new toes. Which ones do you guys are liking?" And so we all chipped in and decided on the toes you guys see now.
Yeah, we even, I mean, going back to before we worked on the Reignited trilogy, we worked on Skylanders, and that was obviously a very different model for Spyro. But one of the things, I mean, Dave and I did some of the original gameplay animation for Spyro in 2010, I don't even remember now. And one of the things our Spyro was capable of doing, or he did frequently, was gesture. He'd pick up his front paws, he'd sit back, pick up his paws, and he'd move his hands around. And so we came into this game thinking, oh, well, we'll need to do that again. So it's hard to get a good hand shape when all you've got is the 3 paddle fingers and no reference point with the thumb. So we actually ended up adding a thumb to Spyro because we figured we'd need one. And then going through and doing the animations where he was gesticulating and looking back at the originals, he doesn't gesticulate. In game 3, he waves once, but the rest of the time his paws are pretty firmly on the ground. So we ended up not really using the thumb, but it does still create much better shapes in the flight and the runs. You see the fingers curl over, and that thumb kind of really grounds the shape of what the paw looks like. So I'm happy they're there, one way or the other.
Yeah, speaking of the original Skylanders, I was just telling him earlier that we were super excited when we got eyebrow controls. We were so pumped about that because the original, we would just have to squeeze down the eyes, the geometry, and just open it, and that was a blink. And we got eyelids, eyebrows.
Very exciting.
Yeah, and so that'll bring us into the rigs, which this is the current Spyro rig that we've worked with. And our rigger, Sammy Lohr, like we've worked with her constantly, going back and forth, and we've tested this rig back and forth. She's come up with an amazing like wing system that we've used on all the dragons, and she's just been doing such a great job. But a lot of that system is just a back and forth too. And with her, she needed to establish, very specific rigging parameters for our outsourcing riggers that they needed to do and follow in order to achieve something that we would be able to use and we'd be able to, for our contractors to use as well.
Keep the animators' heads from exploding.
Oh, yeah. All right, so this guy is actually the very first Nork we were using as our test guy. So every animation, every character in-game started off as him. If there was a flying guy, he would be up there just doing random animations. But we played through the entire game and every level with this guy. And there's definitely an importance to using your test characters.
Another thing to remember is the original Spyro game, all the characters were vertex animated. So it wasn't bone animation, which means you're dealing with recreating animations that had almost an unlimited level of flexibility, because you just grab a vertex and yank it off, and now you got a thumb or whatever it is you need to do. Obviously, we didn't do vertex animation for this just because the characters are so much more involved. There's a lot more going on, and bone animation is what we're used to now. But we really wanted to retain that level of flexibility and squash and stretch and that sort of anything goes mentality. So we built our rigs to be very flexible and really push them in the animation and try to get that squash and stretch out of them.
Yeah, this guy allowed us to do some early tests on Sammy's rigs and really be able to try to squeeze as much as much squash and stretch as possible. All right, so this. There we go.
Full screen it. It's getting bigger. Okay.
So,
There's that thumb.
yeah. So I assigned Spyro to one of our animators, Steve Marshall, who did pretty much 90% of. Oops. We'll go back. No. Did 90% of the animation, and with the run, he did vary up from the original run. I pretty much told him to push it as much as possible. Let's see what comes with it. keep the the original aspect of Spyro into this run, bring in the aloofness and just the personality of Spyro. And this was pretty much his first take at it, and he knocked it out of the park, I thought. It was a lot of fun. It's very hoppy, very cat dragon-like, and he truly did capture that.
Yeah, he really did push it too. We had to pull some of the bounce out of it because it had this great big bouncing hop, and it was just the most entertaining thing to watch on the screen. But it called a lot of attention to itself. And the camera rides behind Spyro, so the higher he gets off the ground, the harder it is to see where you're going. The original locomotions for Spyro were pretty linear, pretty on a line. So seeing Steve really take these and run with them and push that great animated timing and cartooniness of it was great to see. It really brought that character to life.
Yeah, and basically that's our philosophy, as all animators know. You push it until it's too much, and then you bring it back just a little bit. And throughout the game, I mean, this is pretty much a testament of just how our thought process was on each one of the characters. Is that we would study the old game, look at the inspiration from it, look at the personality from these guys, and then just try to translate and try to bring up something new. So when I animated this guy, it's all about a sheep in this giant guy's clothing, and just the way he moved, he just needed to dangle all over the place. I just imagine this sheep inside. He just had all these like wooden controls, just trying to figure out how to move this giant dead scarecrow type guy, make him look as creepy as possible.
We really lucked out with the concept art coming out because obviously there's a lot to interpret from the original game here. It's an orange circle in a witch costume. So seeing what the concept artists were able to do with it and run with it, it just was so exciting to see those concepts come back and go, oh, we get to animate that? That's going to be wonderful.
That felt like such a huge process in our animation. It's just like you would see the concept, and every time I would send it to like an outsourcer, or I'd send it to the guys in-house, I would attach that concept and be like, okay, look at this, look at the original game animation, because I'd send a video of the original animation and be like, use the inspiration you're getting from this concept art, because they did so well. They did so awesome on the concept. This is one I wanted to put in because I really pushed for this, and the alternate idle animations didn't get in till the very end. Obviously, we have the ones from the game, which was important to keep in, but then I wanted to bring something a little bit more to the game, and so I put a hard line at like 5 new alternate idle animations. There was like a sneeze that I wanted someone to try. And then that's due to our VFX guy, Terry Allen, and our sound guys, and
technology,
Jan Stack, design guy. That all that had to just accumulate like right at the last moment. That one was the last one to actually get in. But generally, we just said, okay, he's basically like a cat-like dragon. So reference cats.
We all have dogs too. We have a lot of dogs in the office.
Yeah, we're a big studio.
Cats, dogs, any sort of quadruped, we'll use whatever we can. Yeah.
Yep. So I think this is you now.
I'm up. All right. So I was the lead on the cinematic animation Spyro. There was about an hour of cinematics, which is a lot, and we brought in a lot of outsource to help get it done, but one of the things we do in our approach at Toys for Bob is we try to keep all the layout in-house. So we use animators for cinematic layout, and they're responsible for coming up with the initial layout, placing the dialogue, coming up with the camera angles, and doing an initial blocking pass, which is essentially our layout pass, and then giving that over to the animators for polish. It allows us to control as much of that cutscene as humanly possible before it gets out the door and before somebody else starts working on it. We did have to spread out a little bit of the layout work this year because there were just so many cinematic on this project. But yeah, we were able to keep mostly within the process we like to work within. Here's some more face sheets. When we got Spyro originally, we had our artists take a crack at it. And then what really brought the project to life to the studio was when we started to pose the first couple rigs we got and try to get them into those face poses and see, can we reach this pose? Do we need to send it back to modeling? Does the rigger need to take a look at it? How do we get all these really extreme poses out of them? And the first crack at the model was by Megan Gritzfeld, and she did a really bang-up job on the face. Like, we went back and we changed the feet and the wings and whatever else, but the face, outside of getting like touched up on the rig side, very few changes. And I can't believe with how much we pushed that face, the level of work that she did on it was amazing.
That was a testament of like all the back and forth we did, and it's just like there were many moments when they invited us over to their desk, the modelers, and we would just sit over their shoulders and just be like, okay, we're gonna need to animate this a little bit more. We're gonna need geometry a little bit like this, and then we'd go back and they would say, how's this? And it's such a great back and forth throughout the entire project.
And before the Reignited trilogy, we worked on Skylanders, and Skylanders featured somewhere in the realm of 40 playable characters a game. So you're not getting the time to sit and go over each one with the modeler and I wish the face did this, or there's no time. So sitting down with Spyro, it gave us the chance to really drill down on a specific character and get him to look exactly the way we wanted, so he would act and do all the things that we needed him to do. So here's your monkey feet. You can see them down there, real small. And it was very similar to the original shape of the feet. It was just kind of these little pointed nails, and it was very hard to get a good shape out of them. You couldn't tell when they were balled up because there wasn't enough volume. Which is, this was the first version we rigged. And the initial tests for these were how we tested out the rig, just to get a sense for, do we like the way it moves? And what can we do to make it better? And one of our test animations. No dialogue, no audio. Do we have sound? I don't know how to do sound in this.
Is there sound?
Do we have tech support? We should have tested that. This button. I'm afraid to push a button and then have it not do what I want it to do. Okay, well, anyway.
Says things.
He says things. So one of the great things about doing the development on the characters is, because this game existed, we had the audio. We had to pull it out of the game and just go and capture the audio and play it back. So all our dialogue lines had music in them because we weren't able to strip out the music. But we were able to animate to the original dialogue. And then when we re-recorded all the dialogue, which was obviously necessary, we'd go in and retime the animations to fit with the new delivery by Tom Kinney, which was a fun process. Okay. And then, obviously, because we were working so much with outsource, we really drill down and do a lot of face sheets to keep characters on model, so the outsource can obviously continue to animate them like we animate. And we did some outsourcing from other countries, and we found that giving Lipsync poses, mouth poses for all the shapes is really useful, because they can wander off into different spaces where you start getting back mouth shapes you don't expect to see along with certain parts of the dialogue. And there's some more face sheets. We had a lot of really fun NPCs this time around. And Professor and Ripto are a few of my favorites to pose. So one of the big task we had ahead of us when we looked at this game is there are 30 some odd minutes of these hand-animated, pre-rendered cinematics. And in the original game, they were mostly done by one person, thought up and produced and done by a single animator. And there was a lot of interesting takes. There's a lot of very inventive and creative stuff going on in these cinematics. Sometimes the timing can be a little hard to follow. Sometimes the shots can be a little hard to follow. And they were working with a very different tool set. So we wanted to take a look at each scene, and we sat down with the cinematics team, which is myself and one other person. Sue Wong is a fantastic animator, and she did a lot of the animations you'll be seeing. And take a look at each composition and try to find, what can we do to punch it up? What can we do to clarify what's going on? How can we improve or add to the acting? Because we have obviously a ton more controls, more face, more everything. One of the first scenes we looked at, obviously, was the opening cinematic to Spyro 1. And you can see in this cinematic, what they were trying to do was like an interview, like a news interview. You see the boom mic, and in the far left side, there's a hand holding a script and things like that. And it would bounce back and forth between these dragons talking about the villain, Nasty Nork. And then it would cut to Nasty Nork in, like, where? I don't know. It turned out he was standing on the boss platform where you fight him, which doesn't really make sense. What's he sitting there watching TV? Like, what can we do? Like, this scene is hard to follow because of the limitations, I think, on what the original game was. So we took a look at, like, well, because it seems to be a TV interview, let's take a look at where could Nasty be watching TV. So our concept artist came out with this sketch, and we kind of took it and ran with it. Immediately, I kind of got the sense, he's got it's almost dorm roomish or like guy basement, the man cave sort of thing. He's got his little Spyro throw rug, which is my favorite part of the drawing that didn't make it into the actual game. It's got some love letters from the other Norks in the world. It's kind of just this fun little cave space. So I was like, hey, let's put a TV in here. I mean, this was the late 90s. Let's build a 90s TV and give him a couch to sit on. So he can actually have a reason to be reacting to the dragons as they talk. So we went through and we had to scope through the original game and find all the places where they shot the original scenes and set them up in a similar way so they looked familiar. And then we took Nasty when we got him, and that was obviously the first pose I did for this cinematic, because I always felt kind of bad for Nasty. Because he's kind of sitting there and the dragons are talking a lot of trash. And he's the catalyst for what happens in the game, but he never really seems like he was all that bad in the first place to me. Anyway. So the first pose I put him in was this sort of realization that they called him ugly. And I think this really kind of brought the scene together, because you start out with the news footage style animation, then you pull back through the television to see that he's watching it on the TV, then you cut to Nasty and you have that sort of transition. So the space suddenly makes sense, and it's a little easier to follow.
It's kind of messed up. He's just sitting there.
Yeah, he's not doing
anything.
TV. He's watching the news article about himself.
Calls him ugly.
So it's going to be tough without audio. Similar to what we had to do in Spyro 1, Spyro 1 had a very limited number of fully animated cinematics. 2, decided they were going to go all in on cinematics. There's a ton of cinematics in 2. Not only is there the story cinematics, which range in the range from 45 to 2.5 minutes long, which is long for a cutscene if you ask me. But every level had an intro and an outro. And they were all 20 seconds approximately, and they were like these Looney Tunes sort of cartoons. They didn't have any dialogue. They would have audio. Let's see, can I get it to go? Wrong one, there we go. Oh, come on, there we go. So on the left, you see the original, and you see when we first watched the cinematic, and we did sit down, we watched these cinematics over and over, we couldn't figure out what was going on. It took us repeated watch throughs, reading the wiki, and going, what just happened? And so, if you watch it again, you see, okay, there's these guys, they go, oi, 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 and they lift up the goat, and you don't know where the goat's going. And it's like, oh, there's a hint. There's a Yeti. And they walk over, you don't see the Yeti, you do see the Yeti, and then one dude's gone. But the goat's still there. And so it took a little while. We figured it out. And we're like, okay, we get the joke. Can we punch up the joke? Can we clarify it? Can we just, make it a little easier for the viewer to follow? Because they're not going to get a chance to watch it twice in gameplay. You only get a chance to watch it once. So our take, we open on the Yeti. He's hungry. His tummy rumbles, a little hard to see at this size. He roars for another goat. He's still hungry. They run to get the goat. So we're started a little earlier in the process, just to clarify the sequence. And the goat clearly realizes what's going on. He's not happy about it. Again, we're just reinforcing hungry. And then just a little clearer the reaction of what happened. The guy got eaten instead of the goat. There's gobbling noises and all that. So yeah, our goal was to just clarify all these gags and try to punch them up and make them funnier if we could. And some of them were great, some of them were a little confusing. But I think in the end, we ended up using a lot more of the original than we thought we would, looking at what was there, because the more you watch them, the more you kind of get into that original tone and that original style. So here's another example. I'm just going to play the first bit of this. It takes a little while to start up. This is one from Spyro 1, where if you look at this, here we go. Let's go a little longer. So another thing we did was we took a look at compositions and the camera work and just how they're using the screen space. And if you look at the cinematic, there's a lot going on here. You got a sheep, you got Spyro, you got two dragons, you got the boom mic, and you're like, how tall is this cameraman? He's underneath the arm of the guy holding the script. Like, very little about this was clear, and if you watch the scene the whole way through, Spyro is mostly talking, and there's some gags going around in the back. Like eventually, one of the dragons kicks the sheep off the screen, and you see Spyro kind of gesticulated to him, but because they're all just talking and the action is further forward, you don't see most of those gags. So when we took a look at it, we kind of rethought the space. We pulled the Elder Dragons because they weren't really adding much to the scene outside of visual noise anyway. Also, we didn't have access to those models when we started this scene because they weren't done yet. So the limitations we had us simplify this scene to a point where we were able to punch up the gags and the visual comedy a little bit, punch up the camera motion in the sense that there's a cameraman following this action, and really focus on what was important about the scene, is Spyro talking and Spyro and the sheep interacting with each other. And there's some really fun little stuff in here where we really kind of leaned into the concept of this interview process, that there's an interviewer and a cameraman. And if you'll watch, like we tried to have them both be characters in the sequence. Like he's mostly, whoa, Madhouse, what's going on here? He's mostly talking to the interviewer, but when the sheep first pops up behind him, you see the camera move over to the sheep. Spyro sees the camera move and then looks over his shoulder to see that the sheep's there. So we tried to bring in like some realistic space to these cinematics and make even the camera and the interviewer characters. So there's more examples of the same. This is what we call the Fondork cinematic, because I'm a fond you dork is the key line from this sequence. This cutscene was originally in the original game, it's 2.5 minutes long. And 99% of it happens in these 4 shots. So you can think, over 2.5 minutes, you start to get very tired of these angles. So we went in and we tried to punch up everything we could to add different angles, different takes, different looks, and even different body positions to keep the viewer engaged in this scene. We also tried to do our best to shorten it. We cut some at the beginning, and then we ended up using reaction shots and other acting bits, and it ended up getting longer, so I think it ended up about the same amount of time. But this is a big part of our work, is coming up with more interesting ways to frame the action to keep people engaged. And then I think they gave me the 5 minutes, so I'm going to go through this fast. The Elder Dragons were a big part of what we did for Spyro 1. When we started out, we had our original sketches, and they were based very clearly, this is Aster from the opening cinematic, very, very closely on the original. And we talked in meetings about what we would do if we had all the time in the world to do it. And we said, oh, obviously every dragon would be its own dragon and would look totally different. And we'd animate them all, specifically bespoke. And we were all like, that'll never happen. Yeah. There's no time.
Our director's eyes were like,
yeah.
You can do that?
Yeah, it was a bad idea, but we're animators. So yeah, we wanted to do it, but it's never going to happen. So we built this guy, and we used him in a few different tests. We played around a little bit with the unlocking sequence, because the unlocking sequence in the original, the statues would just explode, and then this dragon would like robotically stand up and turn towards, because all the statues are on a profile. So we played around with trying to get like it to turn towards you before it opens, so you wouldn't have to do the robot turn. We did a couple animation tests with the original dragons, and we said, we can take that original shape, change the textures, give him a more old guy animation, and give him some wrinkles. Now he's an old dragon, and we could put a hat on one or something like that. Just little things, so we could share rigs, share animations everywhere we could. And go with that and cover, because there are 75 of these dragons in the game, over 81 cinematics. And they only have, some of them have 5 words before they fly away. You're not going to be able to hear this because we don't have audio. I'm not sure why, but the other thing we tested out was auto-generated lip sync. So we wouldn't have to animate faces for every single one of them. We could feed it a line, and it would generate the mouth poses based on our keys. So this is a test of that. It's not perfect, and this was early in the tech. We got it much better when we used it in other places, but we didn't end up using it in the dragons, because as we started to go, we identified the 5 body types of the dragons in the original game, and we were like, okay, we can share rigs across these body types. So 5 major rigs. And then we started to get the concept art. And then the concept art started to get more complicated. And as animators and artists, this is the coolest thing in the world. We have more I can't show, but they're amazing. The best dragon concepts I've ever seen were developed for this game. But I'm looking at these as an animation lead going, there's no way we're going to be able to animate all this.
Yeah.
These characters, they're like, oh yeah, share the rigs. They're similar. Right, similar. What an artist thinks is similar and what an animator thinks is similar across a rig is very, very different. So there you go. This is an example of the body types. In the upper left, you have the normal body type. In the right, you have the strong. Across the middle are the big. Lower left is the thin, and the lower right is the old, or the elder dragon. And you notice those 2 elder dragons are in the same pose, because they were like, oh yeah, just share those rigs. You can share the animation. They're both holding something circular. It's like one's filled with water, one's a clay pot. Who's going to know? So you have to sit down and explain to the artist about weight and about, truth to material. And in the end, we ended up having to animate every single one of these by hand. Everyone is bespoke animation. We got a ton of outsource. I brought in the gameplay animators to animate. Our original tests were just doing our best to put the animators in a place to succeed by giving them a basic set of things to do. So they would burst out of the dragon, they would deliver their dialogue line, and then they would fly away. And then we tucked an idle in there just in case they had to listen to Spyro say anything. And we felt like this was a pretty successful first pass, and we took that and ran with it. And you can see here the different stages. So statue to idle, there's them waking up. Idle would be very simple because they were frequently not used. Dialogue. There's some great animation. An Israeli animator named Rafi animated this character, and I love that when he's thinking, he kind of crosses his eyes and looks up. It's one of my favorite parts of the game. And then we added this to the original game, a flyaway, because in the original game they would just shrink down into a little thing. And we were like, well, we want to do something more interesting than that. Could we leave them there? Leave them in the world so they can watch you as you run around? And the engineers gave me the dirtiest look you could possibly imagine, because they're very heavy and the textures are very detailed. So we were like, oh, okay, we'll make them fly away. And it came out pretty nice. And one thing to watch, we knew that people would run away because the flyaway happens during gameplay, so people tend to just run off and they don't watch it. A lot of the dragons that are inside and are underneath a roof, they can't fly away, so we had them do different funny little things. So if you sit and watch the dragons, sometimes you might find a couple of interesting Easter eggs in there. It happens as an effect goes off, so sometimes you miss them. But they're still pretty fun. And then the final product was something like this. And again, without audio, this loses a little something. He's talking about attack frogs. Cold-blooded killers.
Cold-blooded killers.
Used to be such a nice swamp.
We've heard the audio a lot.
Yeah, we listened to these over and over again. And we had some really great voice talent in this game. There you go.
Well, that's our presentation. Thank you very much to Twitch for having us. Thank you, guys.